Well, hello and welcome to Biology 142. This is the second of a two-sequence course that will complete your education in anatomy and physiology. So in this particular lecture, what I want to do is talk about the endocrine system. Now, there's a lot of ways we can control the body, and we've already talked about the nervous system, but let me refresh your memory. The autonomic nervous system consists of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. The sympathetic nervous system generally prepares your body for stressful, emergency situations, and it's very quick acting using the nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system generally maintains your body at a normal resting state, so it maintains homeostasis for normal resting body states. The nervous and endocrine systems are going to act together to coordinate all the functions that are going to occur in the human body. The nervous system, of course, as you remember, is going to release neurotransmitters, and these neurotransmitters are fast-acting. The endocrine system is going to release hormones into your bloodstream or into tissue fluid, and they're going to have somewhat of a quick action, but they're going to take a longer period of time in order to do their job. Most hormones are going to circulate through the blood, and they have to find target receptor cells in order to have their activity, as we'll see when we get into each specific kind of hormone. Let me get my pen ready here. So neurotransmitters are going to bind to receptors on target cells, but they have to do that through synapses. And if I just kind of go back to a blank screen, if you remember back to the nervous system, you have the synaptic knob, and then you have, the presynaptic membrane, postsynaptic membrane. We have neurotransmitters in the synaptic vesicles, and they have to be dumped into the synapse. And then they have target receptors that they're going to go to. So the endocrine system works a little differently in that the target cells are going to be further downstream. So if we look at an endocrine cell here, we can see that it is dumping out some kind of hormone. These hormones are going into the circulatory system. They'll go typically to a very distant location, and eventually they will diffuse out of the circulatory system. They'll find a particular protein receptor that is kind of like a lock and key. That particular hormone only fits in that particular receptor there, and then the target cell is going to have some kind of response to that particular hormone. Hormones that don't circulate are called local hormones, or they're also known as paracrines. Those that act on the same cell that secretes the hormone are called autocrines. So we have different kinds of, hormones that utilize tissue fluid as opposed to the bloodstream. So here we can see a paracrine cell secreting a paracrine. Here's a nearby target cell, and it's got the receptor that receives the information. This can be done through tissue fluid. Remember, all the cells in your body are bathed in a fluid. And an autocrine cell is going to release an autocrine, which is a hormone that goes back and actually activates the actual cell that secretes the hormone. Just a little comparison chart to get you to remind you of how the nervous system versus the endocrine system is going to work. So the mediator molecules for the nervous system are neurotransmitters. Their action is at the synapse, the space between the presynaptic and postsynaptic membranes. They're going to work in milliseconds, and their duration of action is typically short-lived, only milliseconds. Hormones are going to be the mediator molecules of the endocrine system. They typically are going to travel far from their release site. They can work in seconds, hours, and days. So they have a shorter They have a longer period of time that it takes for them to actually become active, and the duration can last from second to days. So they can have a long-term duration or a short-term duration depending upon the particular hormone. So hormones are sent via the bloodstream. They serve many different functions. Let me just give you a few different functions that they serve. So they can control metabolic processes and metabolic rates. Your basal metabolic rate, how fast you burn calories, is controlled by a hormone. These are going to aid in transporting substances across the cell membranes, such as a hormone as insulin will tell your cells to absorb sugar. They regulate water and electrolyte balance, so we're talking about sodium and potassium. They're going to control the diameter of your blood vessels, therefore they can control blood pressure. They do control biological clocks, such as your sleep-wake cycles. They control all the reproductive activities that we have, that is sexual maturation, the development and growth of your body and your sex organs. They also control the contraction of cardiac and smooth muscle tissue. So we're talking major activities all throughout the body. These things are really super important, and they have a lot more functions than this. This is just a small list to whet your appetite. So there are many endocrine glands that specifically serve the function of the endocrine system. The pituitary gland is a dedicated endocrine gland. The thyroid gland is as well. Parathyroid glands, adrenal glands, and the pineal gland is going to be, these are dedicated endocrine glands, and their main job is to do only those particular functions. There are a lot of other tissues and organs that have other roles that they play for the human body, but they also have secondary roles of secreting hormones. And these would include things like the hypothalamus, the thymus, pancreas, the ovaries and testes, kidneys, stomach, liver, intestines, skin, heart, adipose tissue, the placenta, which is the organ that forms between the fetus or the embryo and the placenta of the uterine lining of the mother. These are all parts that play other roles, but they do have endocrine functions as well. There's probably more parts than this too that have endocrine functions, but at some point you got to stop and say this is what we're going to learn for this particular course. This is just a picture showing you various locations of the glands that are going to service the endocrine system, and we'll talk about each of these as we go through this lecture. So there are different kinds of hormones, and these different hormones have different building blocks. So, for example, there are steroid hormones that the human body makes, and these particular hormones have a precursor molecule called cholesterol. You may think that cholesterol is a bad molecule for you to eat, but it's a very necessary molecule for you to eat, and because your steroid hormones are based off of this molecule. Your human body will take this cholesterol and using enzymes will convert it into various kinds of hormones. Cholesterol is also made by the liver, and sometimes we do overproduce cholesterol and that can cause problems for us, but you do have to have cholesterol in order to survive. So estrogen and progesterone and testosterone, these are all hormones that are steroid-based hormones made from the precursor called cholesterol. There are also amino acid-based hormones. These are made from single amino acids. Epinephrine and thyroid hormones are made from single amino acids. There are peptide or protein hormones. These are made from sequences of amino acids, so they're basically proteins. Insulin and growth hormone would be examples of peptide hormones. Eicosanoids are made from arachidonic acid. This is a molecule that's liberated from your cell membranes. And prostaglandins and leukotrienes. These are molecules we'll talk more about later on when we talk about the reproductive system and the lymphatic system. And they're really important molecules at doing things like mediating pain and controlling some aspects of your immune system. There's also nitric oxide, which is a gas. So there are hormones that are gas in nature. Carbon monoxide is a hormone, so is nitric oxide. Now, these hormones are going to do different things. They're going to be able to go into cells and be used by cells in different kinds of ways. So the lipid-soluble hormones would include your steroid hormones and your thyroid hormones, and nitric oxide. And these are going to utilize a system of talking to target cells that's going to be different than the water-soluble hormones. So your water-soluble hormones will be your tyrosine-based hormones, such as epinephrine, norepinephrine. They're going to be protein hormones and the eicosanoid hormones. These are all going to be water-soluble hormones. So the steroid hormones are going to enter the cell and cause the DNA to change in its activity. So any of your lipid-soluble hormones, they actually have the ability to enter into the cell, right through the cell membrane. Because they're lipid-soluble, they can go right through that cell membrane. They're going to find some kind of a receptor that they join with. That receptor hormone complex will then go in, and they'll typically target some kind of gene, either to turn it on or turn it off, or regulate its activity in some kind of way. In this particular graphic, it's showing that this hormone receptor complex is activating a gene to produce this messenger RNA molecule, which is being translated, that is, made into a protein, and that new protein will have some kind of activity that will alter the cell in some kind of way. Okay, so that's how lipid-soluble hormones are going to be working. The non-steroid hormones, which are going to be the ones we talked about secondarily just a second ago, the water-soluble hormones, these are going to literally bind to a receptor on the surface of the membrane, so they can't go through the cell. Since they have some kind of a charge which makes them water-soluble, they're not going to go right through the membrane, but rather they're going to have a receptor that they join to. So this hormone is never going to enter into the cell, but it's going to touch a receptor. That receptor is going to be linked to some kind of a protein, which is going to cause a major cascade event inside the cell. It's going to activate other proteins and enzymes, and these proteins and enzymes are going to activate other proteins and enzymes, which will eventually lead to some kind of cellular activity. Okay, so again, there are hormones that can go through the cell membrane, and then there are other hormones that have to touch receptors on the surface of the cell membrane to have their activity that alters the cell. Now, these hormones are regulated by feedback loops, and we have talked in previous lectures about feedback loops. There are feedback loops that are called negative feedback loops, and there's feedback loops that are called positive feedback loops. So we do have to control the activity of a hormone. We do that through the secretion of it. We do that also through feedback loops. And we'll talk about, when we get into specific endocrine glands, we'll talk about the feedback loops that control those particular glands. Well, the pituitary gland will be our first gland we'll study in this thing we call the endocrine system. This is considered by some folks to be a master control gland because it has so many different effects throughout the human body and controls so many other glands throughout the human body. It's only the size of a garden pea, so if you imagine it's a very small, sized part, and it's housed in the sella turcica. That's that little depression in the sphenoid bone. It anatomically and physiologically is divided into two parts. There is an anterior pituitary, there is a posterior pituitary. Each of them secretes different hormones and secretes them in different ways. Now, the thing that controls the pituitary gland is called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, is part of the diencephalon. It is going to be below the thalamus, and it secretes what we call releasing hormones and inhibiting hormones. So if it releases a releasing hormone, it tells the pituitary gland to release a hormone. And if the hypothalamus releases an inhibiting hormone, it tells the pituitary gland to inhibit the release of any particular hormone. These particular releasing and inhibiting hormones are going to reach the pituitary gland through a blood vessel, a little series of blood vessels called the hypophyseal portal vein system. Okay, and so you should know everything about the pituitary gland that you possibly can. You should be able to know how to draw and label the pituitary gland, and we'll work on this in lab. So if you kind of orient yourself, This is going to be anterior over in this direction. This is going to be posterior. This is superior. So we're talking about, this is the part of the brain, the hypothalamus up here, and this is inferior. So this would be in the sella turcica. So the sella turcica would be where this particular gland would be sitting inside of the sphenoid bone. All right, well, let's talk about the anterior first. So if we take a look, the anterior pituitary gland has these little cells extending down from the hypothalamus. These are called neurosecretory cells. These neurosecretory cells are going to release the inhibiting or the releasing hormones into this hypophyseal portal vein system. So we can see blood coming in. The hormones are being put into the bloodstream. They go down through, this would be the infundibulum or the little stalk connecting the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland. So they travel, these hormones travel down this hypophyseal portal vein system, and they are going to diffuse out of that little blood vessel. And there's going to be, as you can see, there are collections of cells in the pituitary gland that are going to secrete another hormone because they're told to release that hormone into these little capillary beds that surround them, and then that hormone will go through your body's circulation to a target cell or gland. Okay, so we have to have releasing hormones or inhibiting hormones to control the activity of these cells in the pituitary gland. These cells in the pituitary gland are only told what to do. And there are different kinds of them. Some of those cells release growth hormone. Some of those cells release follicle-stimulating hormone or luteinizing hormone. So there are different target cells that all these different releasing hormones can work on. And that is how the anterior pituitary works. There are lots of pituitary gland hormones that are released by the anterior pituitary. So the posterior pituitary, the one that's on the backside, remember, this is anterior and this is posterior over here. There are neurosecretory cells that extend out from the hypothalamus all the way into the posterior pituitary. And then those neurosecretory cells will release hormones directly into a capillary bed in the posterior pituitary, and those hormones will go out to the body to have their activity. So oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone are the only two hormones released by the posterior pituitary that we know of at this time. So you be careful, anterior and posterior, can be flopped. So over here, now we have anterior in this direction, posterior in this direction. So we can see the neurosecretory cells are in the hypothalamus. They're releasing hormones into the portal vein vessels. These releasing hormones are going down to the anterior pituitary, and they're causing the release of various hormones into circulation. Some of the hormones that the anterior pituitary releases would include growth hormone, and you can see the hormone here and then the target in this particular graphic that it's going to. So you can see growth hormone is targeting bones. It targets other places, but in this graphic it's just bones that it's showing. Prolactin is a hormone that's going to target the mammary glands. Follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone will target the testes and the ovaries. Thyroid-stimulating hormone targets the thyroid gland. Adrenocorticotropic hormone is going to target the adrenal gland, specifically the adrenal cortex. Melanocyte-stimulating hormone targets melanocytes, and endorphins are going to target pain receptors. These are some of the hormones released by the anterior pituitary. Each of them has a specific job. Growth hormone, growth. Prolactin is going to be production of milk. Follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone will control things like release of testosterone, the stimulation of the production of sperm cells. It also, in females, will do ovulation, the releasing of the egg cell, and it will do things like helping to secrete estrogens. So thyroid stimulating hormone will stimulate the thyroid gland to release thyroxine, and the adrenocorticotropic hormone is going to tell the adrenal cortex to release the glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids. We'll talk about these. I know that's big words, but we'll talk about each of these hormones in just a little bit. So a little bit of an unknown function for melanocyte stimulating hormone. So in adults, we don't know exactly its activity that it does, and then natural painkillers will be what endorphins do. This is just a graphic showing you how the releasing hormones work to tell the pituitary gland to release a hormone, and then how a target organ from that released hormone will cause another hormone to be released. I guess that's a convoluted way of saying it. Let me show you what I mean by that. So thyroid releasing hormone is going to be released by the hypothalamus. It's going to go down through the portal vein system. It's going to stimulate the certain cells in the pituitary gland to release thyroid stimulating hormone. This will go into the circulatory system and go to the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland, because of that hormone, will release thyroid hormones in response to that hormone. Okay, so we have releasing hormones that are going to, like this one is gonadotropin releasing hormone. It's going to go into the portal vein system to cause cells in the anterior pituitary to release their actual hormones. Those go into the circulatory system and go to target glands, which then eventually will cause a particular hormone to be released after that point in time. Now, I also want you to remember, we not only have releasing hormones, but we have inhibiting hormones. So the hypothalamus can control the anterior pituitary by releasing inhibiting hormones or releasing hormones. Releasing hormones tell the pituitary gland to release a hormone. Inhibiting hormones tell the anterior pituitary to stop the production of a particular hormone. And this is a busy diagram indicating the different places in the pituitary gland that release hormones. So you can see the posterior pituitary is going to release antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin, and they have various activities. The anterior pituitary releases all of these particular hormones, and it shows you their target glands and their activities. There is a little place just recently that we that have named this little pars intermedia, which is a little intermediate segment between the posterior and anterior pituitary that releases the melanocyte stimulating hormone. Remember, in healthy, normal adults, our understanding of melanocyte stimulating hormone is uncertain at this time. There are some disease states, though, where more of this hormone will be produced and it will cause a darkening of the skin. So it causes melanocytes to produce more melanin. And there's all kinds of charts in your book that you can look at that will tell you each hormone and what each hormone does. You are responsible for knowing all the hormones and what all hormones, generally speaking, do. So that'll be something you can work on by your reading and through watching the rest of this video, and also by doing lab work. So this is just showing you a graphic where the anterior pituitary is here, posterior pituitary is here, showing you neurosecretory cells extending down from the hypothalamus into the posterior pituitary, releasing antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. Antidiuretic hormone is really important. It basically helps you to retain water. Oxytocin is kind of important too, in that it communicates to mammary glands to release milk. It also will communicate to the uterine muscles during childbirth to contract. So those uterine muscles, the uterus will contract based on oxytocin being released from the posterior pituitary. And this is just a graphic showing you the hormone and it's what controls it, and then what its actions are. So let me tell you how one of these hormones works for the anterior pituitary, so at least, the posterior pituitary, so at least you have some semblance of how these things work. So how in the world does diuretic hormone, how is it released? So in order for it to be released, you have to have what we call hypertonic blood. So your blood has to be really super devoid of water. So high in sodium. Your cells inside of your hypothalamus can actually sense this. We have what we call osmoreceptor cells. Osmos do root for water. So we have literally cells in the hypothalamus that will shrink due to hypertonic blood. So as a behavior, these cells are going to create the behavior of thirst, so it'll make you feel thirsty. Not only will these cells create the sensation of thirst, but they'll also send signals to neurosecretory cells in the hypothalamus. These neurosecretory cells are going to extend down into the posterior pituitary, and they're going to make and release antidiuretic hormone into the capillaries in the posterior pituitary gland. So these posterior pituitary capillaries are going to capture this antidiuretic hormone, take it into circulation. It'll go to everywhere in your body. This antidiuretic hormone will go to your hair cells. It'll go to your big toe. It'll go to all your muscle cells. But its target cell is going to be the kidney. What it's going to do is it's going to target specific cells in the kidney, specific cells in the collecting duct of the kidney. And this antidiuretic hormone will make them more permeable to water, so you can reabsorb more water back into the circulation of your body. And we'll talk when we get into the urinary system specifically how that works. But the antidiuretic hormone has a specific target cell. Now, if you're not the target cell, you can't understand what the message means. Therefore, you won't do anything in response to antidiuretic hormone. The collecting ducts will basically reabsorb more water into the capillaries that are surrounding them. This raises the concentration of water in your blood. The high water concentration will then, in a negative feedback loop, cause the hypothalamus to decrease antidiuretic hormone secretion. So this is how antidiuretic hormone works and how it works in a negative feedback loop. Once you have enough of the final product, it shuts down the production of the hormone, thus it will decrease the retention of water. So antidiuretic hormone is really important to you. On a nice hot day when you start to sweat a lot, the blood becomes hypertonic and will cause you to retain water, become thirsty, drink more water, and to increase the concentration of water in your blood. There are some disorders, as you can imagine, if that's the way that normal pituitary gland works. There are many disorders that can cause the overproduction or the underproduction of hormones. Diabetes insipidus is a endocrine disorder that's relatively common, and it causes the reduction of antidiuretic hormone. So you can imagine if you can't produce antidiuretic hormone, that's going to cause excessive urine production. It's going to cause excessive thirst, and because you're losing so much water out of your body. So we treat that with a synthetic antidiuretic hormone called desmopressin. And if you take that, you can have a normal, healthy life. If you don't take that, then you will continue to have excessive thirst, excessive urine production, and it can be very problematic. If you produce too much urine, you can wash out too many electrolytes, which will disrupt the balance of electrolytes in your bloodstream and can cause problems for you, like cramping or heart problems. So two other disorders that are due to the excessive secretion of anterior pituitary hormones would be the pituitary gigantism. This happens in children, and it happens early in life, and it happens from the excessive secretion of growth hormone. So you can see these identical twins here. One of them has pituitary gigantism, so therefore his pituitary gland produced too much growth hormone and continues to produce too much growth hormone. You can see the size difference between the average sized twin and the larger twin due to the excessive amount of growth hormone. So later in life, after you've grown to a normal size, acromegaly can happen to you, and this is where you start to secrete excessive amounts of growth hormone because of probably some kind of a pituitary gland tumor. So this is a graphic of a male with acromegaly, and this shows you, this graphic over here on the left-hand side shows you what the person looked like before acromegaly began, before they began to secrete, oversecrete growth hormone, and then the after effects. So you can see loss of the oval facial features, the thickening of lips, the parotid gland hypertrophy, so it makes you kind of have a swelling outside of the on the side of the face. So you have enlargement of the base of the nose. We get a brow furrow, as you can see in this gentleman down here, and then just an increase in the expansion of the frontal bone. So you get a broadening of the forehead. Acromegaly has many different kinds of symptoms and problems. So arthropathy, your joints grow so large and so big and so fast that you can have all kinds of joint pain, enlarged feet, enlarged hands, enlarged colon polyps or bulges of the colon, outside of the colon. You can have an expansion of your organs, the enlargement of the hands. Oddly enough, you have hypogonadism, which is a shrinking or shriveling of the gonadal tissues. You can have all kinds of heart problems, high blood pressure, and then other kinds of problems with acromegaly. There are hormones that you can take and inject into that will decrease the effects of growth hormone. So somatostatin is a non-surgical means of correcting that. But if you do have a tumor in the pituitary, you could have that removed through surgical means. All right, well, let's move on from the pituitary gland and move into the thyroid gland. So if you take and feel your larynx, that will be your voice box. Mine's located right about there. And feel right below it, there's a spongy material called the thyroid gland. It kind of has a nodular effect to it, and looks like little nodulars all over the surface of it. And then you have a connecting isthmus between it. If you kind of look at it in a gross specimen, there is a right lateral lobe and a left lateral lobe, and there's the isthmus that connects the two lobes to it. And this is just showing you what it looks like in with the various arteries beside it. So your common carotid artery goes right beside it. There are extensions that come off of that that feed it. So there's all kinds of vasculature that goes to that. You have venous supply, blood supply that comes out of it, so that you can drain blood out of it. So it has a really good blood supply to it. But so it's located in your throat, and again, it's right below the larynx, so you can kind of feel that. Histologically, if you cut it in cross-section and look at it under a microscope, you can see that it is highly vascular. There's lots of capillaries to it. There is a capsule that's around it, and if you go inside, there are going to be these cuboidal follicular cells. So it's the cuboidal-shaped follicular cells that enclose or make a follicle cavity. Inside that follicle cavity will be a proteinaceous substance called thyroglobulin that's going to be stored, and it stores the hormones, the thyroid hormones that are going to be made by this gland. So these are called follicles. These little follicular cells, and then the follicular cavity are called thyroid follicles, and that's what you would expect to see. If you look at it under a microscope, this is what it looks like. Of course, this is artist rendition on the left-hand side. So under the microscope, you can see there's that cuboidal follicular cells that surround the follicle, And then in between that, you're going to have these parafollicular cells, or C cells, that are going, the cuboidal follicular cells will produce the thyroid hormones. The C cells are going to produce a different hormone that we'll see in a minute, called calcitonin. So the thyroid gland hormones are going to use tyrosine as the building block, and also the atom iodine. So it requires, in order for thyroid hormones to be made, you have to have tyrosine and you have to have iodine. These particular components will be used by the follicular cells, those cuboidal follicular cells, to make various thyroid hormones. So the thyroid hormones include thyroxine, and it's also known as T4 because it has 4 iodine atoms in the final molecule that's built. And we have triiodothyronine, and that's also known as T3. Both these hormones are made by the thyroid gland and by specifically the follicular cells of the thyroid gland. These are super powerful hormones. I can't express to you enough how powerful these things are. So these hormones increase basal metabolic rate. So the speed at which you burn calories is controlled by thyroid hormones. So if you produce too many of these hormones or too little of these hormones, that can have a great influence on the size of your body. So it helps to maintain normal body temperatures. So you can increase or decrease these hormones to help regulate body temperature. These hormones are going to be working along with growth hormone to stimulate protein synthesis. So they also will increase the use of glucose and fatty acids for the production of ATP, or the energy that is used by the cells of your body. And it will work in conjunction with human growth hormone and also insulin to accelerate the growth of your body. So these thyroid hormones are really super critical to the normal functioning of the human body. Let me just show you how this hormone can be controlled, or how its activity works. So the hypothalamus releases thyroid releasing hormone into the portal vein system. It goes down to the anterior pituitary gland, and that stimulates the release of thyroid stimulating hormone. That goes into your capillaries. It goes all throughout your body, but the target cells are in the thyroid gland. So it stimulates the thyroid gland, specifically the cuboidal follicular cells around the thyroid follicles. They're going to be stimulated to release thyroxine. That's going to go into your bloodstream, and it's going to have certain target cells throughout the body that it targets. In this particular example, thyroxine is going to cause an increase in metabolic rate, so that increases your aerobic respiration in the mitochondria, so they're going to become more active, more ATP will be produced. This increases the heat production, because as the aerobic respiration increases, the movement of the enzymes increases the heat, and that will increase your body temperature. Okay, so that's one way how a thyroid hormone can work. Now, once you produce the T3, T4, so your thyroid hormones, they will actually go back to the hypothalamus, or and cause the hypothalamus to stop releasing thyroid releasing hormone. So there is a negative feedback loop there. So once you have enough of these produced, they can shut down their production so that you don't have too many of them. Thyroid stimulating hormone can also work in a negative feedback loop to go back and to the hypothalamus and stop the production of thyroid releasing hormone. So we have several ways to control these hormones. Now, when you don't have enough of these, that negative inhibition will be stopped. Therefore, thyroid releasing hormone will start to be produced, and you'll release more thyroid stimulating hormone. Another hormone produced by the thyroid gland is going to be calcitonin. This is going to be produced by those cells called C cells or parafollicular cells. This hormone is going to help regulate the calcium concentration in the fluids of your body. It inhibits osteoclast. So the way that it works is by inhibiting osteoclast. If you remember back to the first part of anatomy, osteoclasts are bone-destroying cells, and they basically reabsorb calcium back into your bloodstream. So the job of C cells is to stop those cells from breaking down bone. It also will work by stimulating calcium excretion by the kidneys. So this helps to regulate calcium concentration in the fluids of your body, and so basically what they're doing is increasing calcium in the fluids of your body, and regulating these particular influences. So so they have different activities in different parts of the body, depending upon what they're trying to do. So so these are going to be basically causing or stimulating calcium excretion, getting rid of the calcium out of the kidneys, and it actually prevents calcium absorption by the digestive tract. So calcium concentrations are super important in the human body. We have to have a certain amount of calcium so that our organs work. Just to kind of to remind you, if we have low calcium levels, this actually causes cells to take in sodium ions. So low calcium levels will cause cells to take in sodium ions. This makes the cells less excitable. So you can imagine if the heart muscle tissue is less excitable, or your muscle tissue is less excitable, or your nervous tissue is less excitable, this can cause problems in the human body. So typically it can cause convulsions and muscular spasms if you have low calcium levels. So calcium is really important to have in the body. Calcitonin is one hormone that is going to help regulate it in the tissues, the body fluids. Okay, so this is just showing you just a table of the various hormones and what controls them and what jobs they actually do. So just as we have problems with the pituitary gland, there could be problems with the thyroid gland as well. One of the problems is called goiter. Goiter is caused by a reduction in the production of thyroid hormone. So if you stop having iodine in your diet, then your thyroid hormones won't be produced, and basically your brain will think, hey, you need more thyroid hormone, so it sends a signal, make more thyroid hormone, but you can't because you don't have iodine. And that will cause an enlargement of the follicular cells and an expansion of the thyroid gland. So the cure for, or the prevention of goiter is to eat plenty of iodine in your diet. Typically fish has a lot of iodine, but your government actually iodizes all salt. So if you look at a salt container, not the one you shake salt out of, but the one that you buy salt in, you'll see that it is iodized, so that we prevent goiter from happening. Now, in the olden days, people that didn't get enough iodine, people that lived inland away from the sea and didn't get enough iodine, goiter would be a very common symptom you would see in people during those time periods. So Graves' disease is basically caused by a bulging of, Graves' disease develops due to excessive thyroid hormone secretion. And symptoms that you can see will be bulging eyes, and sometimes a goiter will develop due to excessive thyroid hormone secretion. And this is just showing you the bulging of the eyes. All right, well, parathyroid glands are located on the back side, or the posterior side, of the thyroid gland. So you can look at the thyroid gland. Behind it, there are 4 little glands there that are called parathyroid glands. And this is just showing you all 4 of them here in this graphic, and you can see that that there are cells, histologically, if you section this, there are cells in there that are going to be releasing the parathyroid gland secretions, or parathyroid hormone. So parathyroid hormone is released by the parathyroid glands. It's a major regulator of the levels of calcium, magnesium, and phosphate ions in blood. It acts on bone to increase the number and activity of osteoclasts. So it has a kind of a little bit of a reverse effect of calcitonin, acting on bones to increase activity of osteoclasts. It acts on the kidneys to decrease the loss of calcium and magnesium to the urine. So thus, it will help to increase the amount of calcium in the bloodstream. So it acts on the kidneys to increase the production of calcitriol. Calcitriol is the active form of vitamin D. This hormone is going to increase the absorption of calcium by your digestive tract. And this is showing you kind of parathyroid hormone, calcitonin working in conjunction with each other. So if we have high levels of calcium in the blood, this will stimulate the thyroid gland to release the calcitonin. So those C cells will release calcitonin. Calcitonin is going to inhibit the osteoclast, thus decreasing the blood calcium levels. It's so if we take and follow this graphic here, low levels of calcium in the blood stimulate parathyroid hormone to be released from the parathyroid glands. The parathyroid hormone is going to promote the release of calcium from the bone. It's going to slow the loss of calcium from the kidneys into your urine, increase the blood level of calcium. So parathyroid hormone stimulates the kidneys to release calcitriol. Calcitriol is going to stimulate the absorption of calcium in the bloodstream. And once we have high levels of calcium in the bloodstream, calcitonin will then take over. So this is just showing you, this graphic is just showing you the production of calcitonin and parathyroid hormone and how they regulate the concentration of calcium in the bloodstream. This graphic is just showing you the same thing. It just has a little bit more detail to it. So take a look at it and see how calcitonin and parathyroid hormone are working to establish and maintain homeostasis of calcium levels. I think what I'll do is stop this video here. We'll do this in 2 parts, so kind of give you a break and let me take a little break. And so in the second part of this, we'll talk about the adrenal glands and wrap up other endocrine glands. So until next time, I will see you later.